All right, welcome to the weekly current events and election 2020 update hosted by our AP Gov team. So my name is Akalash.
And I'm Fatma.
And we're both really excited to get started today. So as always, make sure to follow Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. The handle is ThinkFiveable, and you'll get a lot of important updates so that you don't miss out on any of our streams, whether that be the AP Gov streams or any of the other subjects that we offer here on Fiveable. As always, a little bit more about a top ISIS leader that was killed over the weekend. Some other current events, and then Fatima is going to talk a little bit more about the election in 2020 with the Democratic primary, Republican primary, and a piece of legislation called the SHIELD Act. All right, so getting started with the impeachment update. One really important thing that has emerged over the past week is that the House plans to take the first vote of impeachment, basically on the application of the impeachment inquiry on this Thursday. Their main goal is to see if the impeachment inquiry can be affirmed, even though it kind of comes just a few weeks after the Democrats have been saying that they don't need any kind of vote to affirm the House impeachment proceedings. These impeachment proceedings have been going on for a while, but Republicans have complained that it is partisan and that it's not being investigated fairly. Therefore, eventually this vote was decided on, and the first vote, like I said, is this Thursday. It's the first time since September that the entire House of Representatives has gone on record with regards to the inquiry, and the impeachment inquiry has been underway since September. So even though it might not feel like a long time, it's been almost 2 months already. So with, I guess, pressure building on the outside from Republicans, as well as internal pressure from the Democrats, this vote has been scheduled for this Thursday on basically the opinion of what people think on the impeachment proceeding. A little bit more with testimony and what happened over the past week that relates specifically to impeachment. So what happened was a key testimony. There was a key testimony over the past week, and it was with Bill Taylor. So Bill Taylor was the former U.S. diplomat, or is the U.S. diplomat to Kiev, which is in Ukraine. And there are some things that we already know that that have been key reasons why impeachment is being pushed. So we know that Trump tried to push Ukraine to launch investigations on basically on what was happening with the FBI's Russia investigation, as well as another investigation into Burisma. Burisma is the company that has relations to Biden. It's a gas company, and Joe Biden's son served on the board. So we kind of already knew that these two had been happening, and that had been well documented. But the other thing that we've kind of been lurking around is that the Trump, he wanted a meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is the president of Ukraine. Ukraine's president did want this, and therefore he had been kind of using the investigation and the push to get an investigation in order to kind of look back at what was happening. Additionally, what has been uncovered and what is a real conflict here is that Trump was threatening Ukraine's security by withholding assistance, especially with their ongoing military conflict in Russia. This has really been the key point in which people have thought that really there is a case for impeachment. The testimony that Bill Taylor gave seemed to confirm this. And this was $400 million in congressionally approved military aid. So the fact that Trump was trying to withhold this aid was really the key factor that many people think was unethical, violated his oath of office, and one of the key reasons why people are pushing for impeachment. Another big piece of news that you've probably heard over the past week, really over the past few days, is that ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is now dead at 48. He played a huge role in transforming what was before an insurgency and almost kind of guerrilla warfare into a global terrorist network. Kind of a little bit of background. We've heard of ISIS for so long, really, and all of the negative impacts and horrendous acts that they've committed across the world. But not a lot really is recognized by the modern audience as to their origins. So at the beginning, ISIS was closely linked to Al-Qaeda, which was a group that had basically been in power in Afghanistan for a long time, and they like coordinated the 9/11 attacks. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was really the one that pushed to separate from Al-Qaeda, not really in terms of belief, but in terms of making their own network. And their goal really was to make a caliphate, an Islamic caliphate, in Iraq and Syria. So that's really what that stands for. ISIS is the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Additionally, what had been happening with this was that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was from a tribe that had supposedly had links to Muhammad. And in the Islamic faith, in order for someone to be a caliph or related to a or to take a leadership role, they had to have some sort of lineage or relation to al-Baghdadi. So therefore, that's how he kind of claimed his value and said, okay, I'm the right person to take the lead. What happened with his death really was that he detonated a suicide vest, or rather he was forced to detonate the vest during a raid in northwestern Syria. He's been like the most wanted terrorist for a long time, and this death was following an international manhunt. He evaded capture for almost 10 years, over a decade, I think probably over a decade, and he was under like very high security. So even when he was meeting with other people, his close associates, he barely trusted anyone. And even those he did trust, it was there have been like accounts and people that he was associated with that are now in jail. They basically, what they said was, in order to meet him, they were blindfolded and then they were put on a bus. They were driven for hours and hours on end. And then when their blindfolds were taken off, they were in front of him. And then after their meeting, which he only met for 10 or 15 minutes max, he would have to leave the building first. And once he left the building, the people would have to wait there for hours and hours, just again blindfolded. And then they would again be blindfolded, put on buses, and taken back to the place where they started. So he was under so much security because he was always afraid that someone was going to betray him. Eventually, that's what ended up happening. A person that really that felt that he was forced into this belief and his family really faced a lot of mistreatment from Baghdadi, was eventually the one that sided with the Kurds and provided information that eventually led to the capture. So this is like a huge capture for the United States military and their efforts in Iraq and Syria. The Islamic State was at one point, it had territory the size of Great Britain in Iraq and Syria. So now that's slowly beginning to fade, especially now with the capture of a big leader in ISIS. Like this can be compared almost to the death or the killing of Osama bin Laden in terms of the fall of al-Qaeda. Additionally, some more things about him. He commanded like brutal punishment, especially to non-Muslims, or not really non-Muslims, but people that he didn't believe exactly what he did, the extremist view. Everything, all of his actions revolved around, again, building that caliphate of really Islamic superiority, and not just Islamic superiority, but that portraying that view of extremism across the world. He was a part of coordinating so many attacks that led to the deaths of thousands of people. San Bernardino, Nice in France, all of these attacks did have something to do with ISIS, and he did play a role in them. So kind of not really shifting gears, but maybe a little bit of happy news is about a dog. So this was what's considered by the media now as the top dog. So this military dog and his gender, or his or her gender and name, have not been declassified, is credited in helping with the raid that killed Baghdadi. This dog is a Belgian Malinois, I believe is how you pronounce it. And according to insiders, this is the type of dog that's favored by the military, especially on sensitive missions. This dog now is being portrayed in the media as a hero. Apparently, he played a part in capturing al-Baghdadi in a tunnel right before he detonated his suicide vest. The dog was slightly wounded, but he's returned to duty. And the same type of dog also accompanied Navy SEALs on a mission that killed Osama bin Laden. So really, this kind of shows the hugely significant role of canines in our military, especially on these secret missions. And they're very sensitive. These dogs, they can crawl into small spaces. They work more effectively in the dark than humans do. They have, to an extent, better vision in the dark. And therefore, these dogs are super helpful. And this dog is now being held a hero by American media. Another important political figure that died, I believe just today, is Kay Hagan. Kay Hagan was a former United States Democratic senator from North Carolina, and she died of brain inflammation from some kind of disease that was transmitted with a tick. Past Democratic leaders, including President Obama, Joe Biden, remembered her as a fighting spirit. Joe Biden actually said he visited her just yesterday in Durham right before she passed away. She was crucial and was a key advocate of the Affordable Care Act and the 2009 Recovery Act. The Affordable Care Act especially was very controversial at the time, and she was a key leader in getting that bill passed. It passed with 60 votes.
Oh, okay. So I guess we're gonna wait a couple seconds for to see if the Fiveable account reconnects. But yeah, in the meantime, I'll just okay. Okay, so it seems like he's back.
Yep, I have no idea what happened. We'll start again where we left off. Can everyone see everything? Okay, hopefully so. Sorry about that. I have no idea what happened. My browser just closed. So she really did push for the Affordable Care Act, which was a key piece of legislation during that time. Additionally, she was crucial in pushing for the release of documents about unexplained infant deaths at Fort Bragg, which was also a big piece that was debated at that time and was a leader in the investigation on contaminated water at Camp Lejeune. So she passed away today, and even people that ran against her, including Tom Tillis, who supposedly their race between Tom Tillis and Kay Hagan was one of the most expensive Senate races of all time. He paid tribute to her public service just today. And the last piece is Ruth Bader Ginsburg winning $1 million for the Berggruen Prize for Philosophy and Culture for her contributions to social justice and general equality. She founded the Women's Rights Project of the American Civil Liberties Union, and she co-wrote the first law textbook on gender discrimination. She's really become an icon and important figure that's been recognized, especially with the changing dynamics of the Supreme Court. She's been a consistent figure ever since she was appointed by Bill Clinton. She is still on the Supreme Court. She is quite old. She's 86, but she says she has no plans of leaving the bench anytime soon. And she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, but she says that gave her a renewed zest for life. And she still does a push-up every day, more than I do. So go RBG. Now we'll transition into the election.
Okay, so as you guys probably have been paying attention to the Democratic primary, there's pretty much been a debate every month for the past few months. So there's another one that's going to happen in November. So on November 20th, make sure you guys tune in. And what happened most recently in terms of the debates is that Amy Klobuchar, the senator, qualified for the November debate. And so from the past debate, 8 people had already qualified before her. And so that was Joe Biden, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Tom Steyer, Elizabeth Warren, and Andrew Yang. And so they're already planning to be on stage on the 20th. And so this most recent debate is going to be sponsored by MSNBC and the Washington Post. And the cutoff for new candidates to qualify is November 13th. So after that, even if they do meet the threshold for 3% in 4 different national or early state polls and 165,000 unique donors, they can't make the debate stage. So it's pretty much a time crunch for anyone else who's trying to get on the stage. And so those 3 people who were on the stage in October were Beto O'Rourke, Tulsi Gabbard, and Julian Castro. And so they're all pushing to qualify in these like next 2 weeks to make sure that they'll be on stage on the 20th. And so speaking of Tulsi Gabbard, on this next slide, we're gonna dive into what's happening in her like area of the world. And so Tulsi Gabbard is like Hawaii's, or one of Hawaii's representatives for the US House, and she's decided not to seek re-election for her House seat in 2020. And the reason why that's super important is because she's held the seat since 2012, and on top of that, it means that she's going to continue her run for president in 2020. And so if she doesn't seek re-election, it means she's trying to continue to stay in the presidential race, right? And so if she was intending to like stay and like keep her seat as a representative in the House, it would be like now would be a good time for her to drop out before like she had like any real opposition. And so the things to know about her in terms of like her policy is that she served in the Army National Guard, and so that's one of the reasons why she supports a non-interventionist approach to foreign policy. And she's right now polling at around 1.3%, and she hasn't qualified for the November debate. So that tells you maybe it's not such a great decision for her to stay in the race and formally announce that she's not going to be seeking re-election, but it is the decision she's made. And so the person that was at first challenging her in the Democratic primary, but is now just running for that Democratic seat, is named Kai. He's from Hawaii and he's a state senator, and he's named Kai Kahele. And so he has already raised about $500,000, and he's running unopposed in the Democratic primary. So yeah, he's very likely going to win her seat. And he wished her all the best luck. And so that's a good thing to know that they ended off on like a good note. But in terms of people who are not staying in the race, on this next slide, we'll talk about Tim Ryan. And he's decided to formally end his campaign for president. And he was the Democratic representative, or a Democratic representative from Ohio. And fun fact, we've actually had 8 presidents from Ohio. I looked that up when I was looking into Tim Ryan. But anyways, he decided to drop out of the race, and it was because he had low fundraising numbers and low polling numbers. So that doesn't make for a great combination when you're trying to win the presidency. So he's decided to run for re-election to the congressional seat he's had since 2003. So it seems like a pretty safe bet for him. He's had the seat for like more than a decade. And the reason why he decided to just give up on his presidential bid was because he raised only $1.3 million in 7 months. And when you think about like the other like members of the big three, like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, that have raised like upwards of 20 million in like a quarter, which is 3 months, it didn't look great for his prospects. So he spent most of that money and now has around $158,000 remaining. And so one of the interesting things about the Federal Elections Commission, or the FEC, is that they have this rule that says he can use that money for 3 things. He can either use it to pay the rest of the campaign debt, he can donate it to another campaign, including his own for the House seat, or he can hold it in case he chooses to run for president again. So those are the 3 things he can do with the money. We'll see what he does in the coming months. But yeah, and so now that we've covered what's happening in the Democratic sphere of things, let's look at this super interesting piece of legislation called the SHIELD Act. So the SHIELD Act is actually an acronym. It stands for Stopping Harmful Interference in Elections for a Lasting Democracy. We're just going to be calling it the SHIELD Act because I don't want to say that every single time I refer to it. And so the interesting things that this piece of legislation does is that it really works to strengthen the American electoral system from having interference from like foreign actors. And so we saw in 2016 with like the Mueller investigation and like all these social media companies talking about how they have like foreign accounts on them that are posing to be Americans, that there was a lot of different foreign powers trying to influence American elections. And so if we want a free and fair democracy, that's not exactly something that, that isn't something that we want to happen. So the SHIELD Act is trying to work to counter this. And so it requires that candidates and political committees notify the FBI and other authorities if a foreign power offers campaign help. And so that pretty much means if, like, I don't know, Britain calls you up and is like, hey, Tim Ryan, do you want our help on winning the Democratic nomination? Tim Ryan, if he was still running for president, would have to report that so they could take the proper steps to make sure that that country couldn't actually interfere in the election actively. It also tightens restrictions on campaign spending by foreign nationals, and it requires more transparency in political ads on social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. So the important thing about that is when we look at Facebook and Twitter, there has been a lot of misinformation that was spread through those like platforms, right? And so those parts of the act work to prevent and strengthen that from happening in future. And it also like pretty much straight up says that campaigns can't exchange information that's related to their campaigns with foreign states or their agents, which you would think is like common sense, but apparently it is not, which is why they were making sure that it would be solidified in the SHIELD Act. But there's also been some opposition to the act, and we'll explore that right about now. So when we look at the White House said that it would veto the bill if it made it to President Trump's desk, and they said that because it's too broad and unenforceable, right? And it said that the expansive definitions seem designed to instill fear among Americans engaged in political activity that any interactions they may have with a foreign national could put them in legal jeopardy. So what the White House is trying to say is that if it pretty much is designed to like fear monger, right? So obviously, like the White House, in this case, President Trump would not support this bill because they're saying that, first of all, it's like they just don't know how they would enforce it because there's no like specific clauses that they see as enforceable. But secondly, they feel that it's just something that's going to make Americans like that are working within the political sphere be scared to engage in any interaction with like someone from another country because they might be like put in jail or something. And so interestingly, the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, also said that the bill strikes the long balance by sweeping too broadly and encompassing more speech than necessary to achieve its legitimate goals. And so what the ACLU is saying there is that it's trying to restrict too much speech than is necessary. And so they're saying that, yes, it's important to prevent foreign interference in American elections, but this bill just restricts way too much speech and does way more than what is needed. So those are the two like most important blowback that this SHIELD Act is facing. And so now that we know that, let's look into what's happening with the Republican primary. And so there was recently a Republican debate and for the primary. And so the thing to know here is that a lot of states like South Carolina and a few others have decided not to hold a Republican primary. And so like even though there are people running in this primary, it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be like a ballot for it in a few different states. And that isn't something that's like super out of like the ordinary. Like states have done this in the past where if a president that is an incumbent is running for their second term, that party just will decide to save money and not spend it on like having a primary election in a state. So for the Republican primary, there are actually 3 people running other than President Trump. And so the first is former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld. And so he is a 2020 Republican presidential candidate. And he said that Donald Trump is, quote, too out of control for the US. And the most important thing to know about him was that he was the vice president running mate for Gary Johnson in 2016. So yeah, if anyone remembers anything about the Libertarian vote in 2016, it wasn't very high. And so Bill Weld is actually running, and he even said that he supports impeachment against Trump. And so this shouldn't be like too surprising because he is running to defeat President Trump in the primary. And another important thing that happened was that Joe Walsh, he's one of the former House of Representatives from Illinois, said that the Republican nominee should consider choosing a Democrat as their vice presidential pick, and that he would consider it himself when like they're in Nashville for the convention. And so the reason why he said that is because it would be unifying, right? Because if we're in this time in the country that's like super divided and people aren't seeing eye to eye just because of partisan lines, having a Republican and a Democrat on the same ticket might be unifying and help the Republican candidate get elected. So that's why he thinks it's a great idea, but we'll see what happens with that.